Step into a world where everything seems perfect on the outside, yet something is missing. This is the story of Jonathan Hayes, a millionaire seeking something that wealth could never buy. Sit back, relax, close your eyes, and let this heartwarming love story gently guide you into a world of kindness, connection, and the magic of the holiday season. The first snowfall of December had arrived, covering the city in a blanket of soft, powdery white. The night was calm, with only the gentle whispers of the wind as it passed through the quiet streets. Holiday lights twinkled on every corner, casting a warm, golden glow across the city. The air was crisp, the kind that made you want to curl up by a fire with a warm cup of tea. Yet, for Jonathan Hayes, none of this felt real. None of it felt right. Jonathan sat in the back of a sleek, black car, staring out the window. His sharp suit, perfectly tailored, remained unruffled, yet there was a deep emptiness in his chest that no amount of success or luxury could fill. At 35, Jonathan had everything a person could desire. An enormous tech company, a beautiful penthouse, fast cars, and more wealth than he ever thought possible. But none of that could replace what he longed for. He watched as the streets were filled with laughter and holiday cheer. Children ran through the snow, their tiny footprints leaving marks in the whiteness. Couples held hands as they strolled down the sidewalks, their voices soft and happy. The world around him seemed full of life, full of warmth. Yet Jonathan felt alone. The lights, the sounds, the busy streets, they were all there, but they didn't reach him. The car slowed as it approached a small, cozy community centre tucked away on a quiet street. The outside of the building was simple, but the golden glow of its windows made it look inviting, warm, and alive. It was a stark contrast to the cold, indifferent world Jonathan had been navigating for years. "Sir, the charity event is tonight." His assistant's voice broke the silence, soft but clear. "Do you want me to confirm your donation?" Jonathan's gaze sharpened, focusing on the small, glowing building ahead. His thoughts wandered for a moment, and then, as if inspired by something deep inside him, he made a decision that surprised even himself. "No, don't confirm it," he said softly, his voice calm but purposeful. "Instead, get me the address. I'm going, but not as Jonathan Hayes." His assistant paused for a moment, surprised. "The address, sir?" "Yes," Jonathan replied, a hint of something new in his voice. "I want to go, but not as myself." The car stopped in front of the community centre, and Jonathan stepped out, leaving behind the comforts of his designer coat and expensive watch. He donned a simple sweater and jeans, blending into the crowd. For once, he wasn't the powerful millionaire. He was just another person, a part of the world around him, a world that, for this one evening, he wanted to be a part of, truly. The snow crunched under his shoes as he walked towards the warm light of the centre. Inside, the room buzzed with life. Volunteers hurried about, preparing for the evening's festivities. Children's laughter filled the air, mingling with the soft sounds of Christmas carols playing in the background. The smell of cocoa and freshly baked cookies drifted through the room, adding to the cozy, homey feel of the place. Jonathan watched as people chatted and worked together to decorate the space. It wasn't the extravagance of the parties he was used to, but it felt real authentic in a way he hadn't felt in years. And there, among the volunteers, was a woman who caught his attention. She was near the makeshift stage, arranging some decorations. Her dark brown hair was tied back loosely, and her movements were graceful yet purposeful. Despite the cheer around her, there was something in her eyes, something soft but heavy, as if she carried a quiet sadness that no one could see. Jonathan found himself drawn to her without fully understanding why. She was different, and for the first time in a long while, something stirred inside him. Could you help me with this? Her voice brought him back to the moment. She held up a tangled mess of Christmas lights, her smile warm and sincere. They've got a mind of their own. Jonathan chuckled softly, his voice a low murmur. Sure, not my specialty, but I'll give it a shot. As they worked together, untangling the lights, Jonathan found himself at ease. There was no pretension, no business talk. It was just the two of them, working side by side. He learned that her name was Caroline, and that she'd been volunteering at this event for years, making it a part of her family tradition. As they continued to work, Jonathan felt the weight of his own life lift just a little. Here, in this small, vibrant space, he was reminded of something he had long forgotten, the simplicity and joy of truly connecting with others. The soft, steady hum of the room filled his ears, the laughter of children, the rustling of decorations. Everything seemed so peaceful, and for once, Jonathan was content to simply be in the moment, without worrying about the things that normally filled his thoughts. And so, with each passing minute, he found himself more and more captivated by this woman, not because of anything grand or extraordinary, just because she was kind, steady, and real. And for the first time in years, that was exactly what Jonathan needed. As the evening continued, the community centre became a warm haven, the perfect escape from the cold world outside. Jonathan knew deep down that this night, this quiet, simple night, was going to change him in ways he couldn't yet understand. The warmth of the community centre wrapped around Jonathan like a soft blanket. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the bustling world beyond its glowing windows. Inside, the air was alive with the gentle sounds of Christmas, soft carols, the quiet chatter of volunteers, and the occasional burst of laughter from children. It was a world far removed from his usual life of grand offices and impersonal meetings. Here, he felt present. Caroline worked gracefully, moving from table to table, helping children with crafts and chatting with other volunteers. Her energy was steady, her smile constant. Yet Jonathan couldn't help but notice the faint shadow of tiredness in her movements, like someone carrying more than she let on. She intrigued him, not because of her beauty, but because of her calm strength. For Jonathan, this was a moment of quiet observation. He stood back and watched her, unnoticed among the crowd. It was refreshing to simply exist, without the weight of expectation or recognition. Eventually, Caroline made her way back to the makeshift stage, where Jonathan was still sorting through decorations. She glanced over and smiled, her warmth pulling him from his thoughts. "Looks like you're still untangling those lights," she teased lightly, her voice gentle. Jonathan chuckled softly. "It's harder than it looks," he replied, his tone relaxed. Caroline set down a box of tinsel and leaned against the edge of the stage, her posture casual yet attentive. For a moment they shared a companionable silence, broken only by the sounds of the room around them. It wasn't the awkward silence Jonathan was used to in his world of high-stakes business. It was comfortable, easy. "You're new here, aren't you?" she asked after a moment, her gaze steady. Jonathan nodded, choosing his words carefully. "Yeah, first time. Thought I'd give it a try." Caroline tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Most people come because this event means something to them. What brought you here?" Her question was simple, but it carried weight. Jonathan hesitated, not wanting to reveal too much. "I guess I wanted something different this year," he said finally, his voice quieter. "Something real." Caroline seemed to consider his words, her expression softening. "Well, you've come to the right place. This community, it's real, all right. These people may not have much, but they give with their whole hearts." Jonathan nodded, letting her words sink in. The sincerity of her tone struck a chord deep within him. reminding him of just how far removed his life had become from such simple, meaningful things. As the evening unfolded, the pace of the event began to slow. The initial rush of decorating gave way to quieter moments. Caroline's two children, a boy and a younger girl, played nearby, their laughter adding a lightness to the room. Jonathan couldn't help but notice the way Caroline kept an eye on them, her affection for them clear in every glance. "They're yours?" he asked gently, gesturing towards the children. Caroline smiled, a flicker of pride in her expression. "They are, my whole world, really." Jonathan returned her smile. "They seem happy." "They are," she replied, though there was a faint sadness behind her words. "I do my best for them. It's not always easy, but they deserve a good life." Jonathan nodded, sensing there was more to her story than she let on. He wanted to ask, to know what had shaped this quietly resilient woman, but he held back, respecting the boundaries of a conversation still in its early stages. The children, unaware of the subtle exchange, continued to chatter happily as they worked on their crafts. Caroline's daughter ran up to her, holding a glitter-covered ornament. "Mummy, look, it's a star!" she exclaimed, her voice bright. Caroline crouched down, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. Jonathan watched the scene unfold, something stirring in him that he couldn't quite place. There was a simplicity to it, a beauty in the way Caroline balanced her role as a mother with her quiet contributions to the community around her. She was selfless, giving her time and energy without asking for anything in return. As the night wore on, the community centre's hum grew softer. The children settled near the stage for a reading of a Christmas story, their small faces alight with excitement. Jonathan stood to the side, watching as Caroline sat among them, her daughter snuggled close to her side. Her son leaned against her, his eyes wide with anticipation as the storyteller began. Jonathan felt something unfamiliar, a sense of belonging. This wasn't his world, not yet, but it was a world he wanted to understand, a world where people cared for one another without pretense or expectation. When the story ended and the children dispersed, Caroline rose and began tidying up the tables. Jonathan joined her, helping to stack empty plates and cups. The task was simple, but for Jonathan, it felt grounding. "Thanks for helping," Caroline said softly, glancing at him. "I didn't expect to see someone new stick around so long." Jonathan smiled, a quiet sincerity in his expression. "It's been nice, different, but nice." Caroline returned his smile, her eyes holding his for a moment before she turned back to her work. As the final tasks were completed and the crowd began to thin, Jonathan felt a reluctance to leave. The warmth of the evening, the connection he had felt, was something he hadn't experienced in years, and he wasn't ready to let it go. The evening had grown quieter, with most of the guests now gone, and only a handful of volunteers left tidying the community centre. The glow of the Christmas tree cast gentle patterns of light on the walls, and the faint sound of carols still played softly in the background. The warm, peaceful atmosphere felt like a comforting embrace, wrapping Jonathan in a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. Jonathan found himself by the kitchen, helping to dry dishes alongside Caroline. The hum of the event lingered in the air, but the two worked in a comfortable silence. Caroline's children played nearby, their laughter filling the space like a soothing melody. "Do you volunteer here every year?" Jonathan asked, his voice low and steady. Caroline nodded, her hands moving deftly as she placed a plate on the drying rack. "I do. It's a tradition for me and the kids. They love it, and it keeps us connected to the community. It's grounding." Jonathan glanced at her, intrigued by the weight in her words. Grounding. Caroline paused for a moment, as if weighing whether to share more. "After my husband passed, I felt lost for a long time. Coming here helping others. It reminded me that life still had meaning, even when it felt like everything had fallen apart. Jonathan's chest tightened at her honesty. She spoke with quiet strength that made him admire her even more. He didn't press further, sensing that she had already shared something deeply personal. Instead, he shifted his focus to the children, who were now huddled over a pile of craft supplies, giggling as they worked on a new project. "Your kids are lucky to have you," he said, his tone warm. Caroline smiled softly, her eyes following her children. "They're my everything. They've been my reason to keep going, even on the hardest days." Jonathan nodded, his thoughts swirling. He had always measured success by the size of his accomplishments, the numbers in his bank account. But here was a woman who had found success in the love she gave and the connections she built. It was a kind of wealth he had never known. The evening wore on, and soon the last of the volunteers began to leave. Caroline's children, now tired but happy, sat by the tree, their small forms bathed in its golden light. Jonathan felt the pull of the moment, a sense that something profound was unfolding. "You've done so much for this place," Jonathan said, breaking the comfortable silence. "It's clear how much this community means to you." Caroline leaned against the counter, her expression thoughtful. "It's not about what I've done. It's about what this place has given me, a sense of purpose, a reminder that even in the hardest times, there's still good in the world." Her words settled over Jonathan like a gentle snowfall, quiet yet powerful. For so long, his life had been about ambition, about chasing a vision of success that now seemed hollow. But here, in this small community centre, he was beginning to see a different kind of success, one built on kindness, connection, and meaning. As Caroline gathered her children and prepared to leave, Jonathan lingered near the door, reluctant to let the night end. He watched as Caroline helped her daughter into her coat, her movements tender and patient. Her son tugged at her hand, his voice sleepy as he asked if they could make cookies the next day. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice soft. "Can I walk you to your car?" Caroline looked up, a touch of surprise in her eyes. "That's kind of you, but we only live a block away." "Then let me walk you home," Jonathan offered. "The snow's still falling and it's late." Caroline hesitated, then smiled. "All right, thank you." The four of them stepped out into the crisp night air, the soft crunch of snow underfoot the only sound. The city felt quiet, as though the snowfall had muted its usual hum. Jonathan walked beside Caroline, her children skipping ahead, their laughter trailing behind them like a song. "Do you miss him?" Jonathan asked gently. His voice was barely louder than a whisper. Caroline glanced at him, her expression open but thoughtful. "Every day, but I've learned to focus on what I have, not what I've lost. My kids, this community, they've kept me moving forward." Her words resonated deeply with Jonathan. He had spent years chasing a life he thought would bring him happiness, only to find himself feeling emptier with each passing achievement. Caroline's ability to find joy in the simplest things was both humbling and inspiring. When they reached her modest home, a small brick house with a snow-covered yard, Caroline turned to him, her smile soft but genuine. "Thank you for walking us home. You didn't have to." Jonathan shrugged. His breath was visible in the cold night air. "I wanted to. Tonight, it meant a lot to me." Caroline studied him for a moment, as though searching for something. "You're different," she said quietly. "I don't know what brought you here tonight, but I'm glad you came." Jonathan felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. "I'm glad I came too." With a final smile, Caroline ushered her children inside, their voices fading as the door closed behind them. Jonathan stood on the snowy sidewalk for a moment, staring at the small house. It was simple, unassuming, yet it held a kind of warmth he had never experienced. As he turned to leave, the snow continued to fall, its soft whispers accompanying him on the walk back to his car. The night had been more than an escape. It had been a glimpse into a life filled with meaning, a life he realized he wanted to be a part of. The next morning, the city was blanketed in fresh snow, a pristine white canvas glistening under the pale winter sun. Jonathan found himself staring out the window of his penthouse, the skyline stretching before him. But the grand view, once a source of pride, now felt distant, hollow. His thoughts kept drifting back to the warm glow of the community centre and the quiet strength of Caroline. By midday, Jonathan couldn't shake the pull to return. He dressed simply again, leaving behind his designer watch, an expensive coat, and drove through the snowy streets. This time, there was no hesitation. He knew he wanted to see her, to be part of her world, if only for a little while longer. The community centre was quieter than the night before. A few volunteers bustled about, organising supplies for the upcoming Christmas Eve dinner. Caroline was there, crouched beside her daughter, helping her sort through a box of donated toys. Her son sat nearby, scribbling something on a sheet of paper with intense focus. Jonathan hesitated in the doorway, watching them for a moment. The scene was so ordinary, yet so full of life. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, the sound of his boots crunching against the salt-dusted floor drawing Caroline's attention. "You're back," she said with a small smile, rising to her feet. Her voice was warm, but there was a hint of curiosity in her tone. Jonathan returned her smile. "I couldn't stay away. Do you need help with anything?" Caroline nodded toward a stack of boxes. "We're sorting these by age group for the toy giveaway tomorrow. If you're up for it, we could use the extra hands." Grateful for the chance to stay, Jonathan joined her. Their movements synchronized as they worked side by side. The task was simple, yet the quiet companionship between them made it feel meaningful. As they worked, Caroline's daughter ran over, holding a small, glittery snow globe. "Mummy, look! It's so pretty!" Caroline crouched down, gently taking the globe in her hands. "It is, sweetheart. You can keep it if you like." The little girl's eyes lit up, and she clutched the snow globe tightly, as though it were the most precious thing in the world. Jonathan couldn't help but smile, charmed by her excitement. "She's got a good eye," he said softly. Caroline glanced at him, her smile softening. She's always been good at finding beauty in the smallest things. The quiet moment lingered, the hum of the room fading into the background. Jonathan wanted to say more, to share something of himself, but the words caught in his throat. Caroline had been so open with him, yet he was still hiding behind a mask. The weight of his secret pressed heavily on him, and he knew he couldn't keep it much longer. Later, as they paused for a break, Jonathan found himself sitting across from Caroline at a small table. Her children played nearby, their laughter filling the air. "Caroline," he began hesitantly, his voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked at him, her expression curious but calm. "What is it?" Jonathan hesitated, his heart pounding. He had spent weeks blending into this world, but now the truth felt like a wall between them. Taking a deep breath, he decided to take the leap. "I haven't been completely honest about who I am," he admitted, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "My name is Jonathan Hayes, and I'm not just another volunteer." Caroline frowned slightly, her brows knitting together. "Jonathan Hayes?" she repeated as though trying to place the name. Jonathan nodded, his gaze steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "I run a tech company in the city. I came here because I wanted to see what life was like outside of my world. I didn't mean to deceive you, but I wanted to be part of something real, something meaningful." Caroline was silent for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed softly. "So you're rich?" "Yes," Jonathan said simply, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I didn't want that to define me, not here, and especially not with you." Her gaze softened slightly, but there was a flicker of hurt in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was afraid," Jonathan admitted. "Afraid you'd see me differently, that I'd lose the chance to connect with you. But everything I've said and done here, how I feel about you, it's all real." Caroline's expression remained thoughtful, her emotions carefully guarded. "I don't care about your money, Jonathan, but honesty matters to me. Trust matters." Jonathan nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I understand, and I want to earn that trust. I'll do whatever it takes." The conversation ended there. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. Jonathan spent the rest of the afternoon helping where he could, giving Caroline space while trying to show through his actions that he truly cared. As the day wound down and the sun began to set, the community centre took on a quiet stillness. Jonathan lingered near the door, watching as Caroline bundled her children into their coats. She caught his eye, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you for helping today," she said, her voice gentle but reserved. "It was my pleasure," Jonathan replied. "I'll be back tomorrow, if that's all right." Caroline nodded, her smile faint but genuine. "All right." As she and her children walked out into the snowy evening, Jonathan stood in the doorway, watching them disappear into the night. He felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. He had taken the first step, and now he was determined to prove to her that he was more than just the man he had once been. Christmas Eve arrived with a quiet serenity, the soft snowfall blanketing the city in a peaceful hush. The streets were lined with twinkling lights, and wreaths adorned the doors of every house. Inside the community centre, the atmosphere was bustling yet warm, filled with the hum of volunteers preparing for the evening's holiday dinner. The scent of fresh bread and roasted vegetables filled the air, mingling with the soft notes of Christmas carols playing in the background. Jonathan arrived early, carrying boxes of supplies he had picked up that morning. His heart was lighter, yet his resolve stronger than ever. He had spent the previous night reflecting on Caroline's words, and knew he needed to show her, not with grand gestures, but with sincerity, that she could trust him. The community centre was already alive with activity when he stepped inside. Volunteers were arranging tables, setting out food, and placing small gifts for the children. Jonathan spotted Caroline across the room, helping her daughter tie a ribbon on a small package. Her son stood nearby, proudly showing off a snowflake he had cut from paper. Jonathan approached cautiously, his steps slow. "Good morning," he said gently, his voice carrying over the bustling noise. Caroline looked up, her expression soft but measured. "Morning," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I brought a few things to help," Jonathan said, setting the boxes down. He opened one to reveal neatly wrapped toys, blankets, and winter coats. "I thought these might be useful." Caroline's eyes widened slightly as she glanced at the contents of the box. "That's very generous," she said softly, her tone thoughtful. "It's not about generosity," Jonathan replied. "This place has given me more than I could ever give back. I just wanted to do something that felt right." Caroline studied him for a moment, her gaze searching. There was no arrogance in his words, no attempt to impress, just quiet sincerity. She nodded slowly. "Thank you. The families here will really appreciate it. Jonathan spent the day working alongside the other volunteers, helping to set up tables, decorate the room, and organize the donated items. He moved through the tasks with ease that surprised even himself, finding joy in the simple act of contributing. Caroline's children seemed to warm to him even more, tugging at his hand to show him their crafts and laughing as he helped them hang ornaments on the tree. As evening fell, the community centre filled with families. The room buzzed with quiet excitement as children darted between tables, their eyes wide with wonder at the decorations and gifts. The dinner was served buffet style, with volunteers, including Jonathan, handing out plates piled high with warm, comforting food. Jonathan couldn't help but notice the lightness in the air, the way everyone seemed to carry a sense of togetherness. He glanced at Caroline, who was helping an elderly man with his coat. She was tireless, her kindness shining through in every gesture. As the dinner wound down, Caroline's children gathered near the tree with the others, giggling as they waited for their presents to be handed out. Jonathan approached Caroline, who was tidying up a nearby table, and hesitated before speaking. "Caroline," he said softly, "can we talk for a moment?" She looked up, her expression calm but curious. "Sure." Jonathan led her to a quieter corner of the room, away from the crowd. The glow of the Christmas tree lit her face, her features soft but steady. He took a deep breath, his heart racing. "I just wanted to say thank you," he began, "not just for tonight, but for everything. Being here, seeing the way you care for this community, for your children, it's shown me what really matters." Caroline listened quietly, her gaze unwavering. "I've spent so much of my life chasing things that don't mean anything," Jonathan continued, his voice steady but earnest. "But you've reminded me that the real gifts in life aren't things. They're the connections we make, the people we care about. And I care about you, Caroline, more than I can put into words." For a moment, there was only silence between them, broken only by the distant sound of children's laughter. Caroline's expression softened, her guardedness easing. "I care about you too, Jonathan," she said finally, her voice quiet but sure. "But trust takes time. It's not something that can be fixed overnight." "I know," Jonathan replied, "and I'm not asking for anything more than the chance to prove to you that I mean what I say." Caroline smiled faintly, a warmth returning to her eyes. "You're already doing that." As the night drew to a close, the families began to leave, their arms filled with gifts and their hearts warmed by the evening's festivities. Caroline's children clung to her hands, their sleepy smiles, a testament to the joy they had experienced. Jonathan helped clean up, his movements purposeful but unhurried. When the room was nearly empty, Caroline approached him, her children by her side. "Thank you for everything today," she said, her voice sincere. "You've done more than you realize." Jonathan smiled, his gaze falling briefly on her children before returning to her. "Merry Christmas, Caroline," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Jonathan," she replied, her smile reaching her eyes. As they stepped outside, the snow was falling softly, the night quiet and still. The air was cold, but the warmth of the evening lingered. Caroline and her children walked ahead, their silhouettes illuminated by the glow of a street lamp. Jonathan stood for a moment, watching them, a deep sense of peace settling over him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the snow continued to fall that Christmas Eve, Jonathan realized he had found something far greater than success. He had discovered the joy of connection, the warmth of community, and the quiet magic of love. For Caroline and her children, this Christmas brought more than just gifts. It brought hope and the start of a new chapter filled with trust and kindness. Together, they reminded us of all that the true gifts of the season are not things, but the moments we share and the hearts we touch. If this story warmed your heart, take a moment to reflect on the simple joys in your own life. Remember to be kind, to give, and to cherish the connections that matter most. If you enjoyed this soothing bedtime story, Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more peaceful tales to guide you into a restful sleep. Sweet dreams, and may your holidays be filled with love and light.